Hello, everyone, and welcome to Voices for Mental Health, featuring real people, real stories, real hope. I'm your host, Candace Schoner, and today my guest, Joanne Ometz, and I will be discussing the impact of cult culture on mental health. Joanne is a trauma survivor and has agreed to talk about her early childhood raised by her father and grandfather, devout cult members. Joanne only recently started uncovering her memories of abuse, previously repressed due to her traumatic experiences. This is the very first time she is sharing her story, and in some cases, not just with us, but with herself. Welcome, Joanne, to the podcast, and thank you for agreeing to share your story with others.
Thank you for having me.
First, let me say how sorry I am that you had such a traumatic experience. I know it's extremely difficult to leave a cult and takes tremendous psychological strength and fortitude. So congratulations.
Thank you.
For those who are not familiar with cult culture, how would you describe it?
Oh, let's see. I guess to try and put it into as few words as possible, it's a culture of not paying attention to what you actually experience and being indoctrinated into experiencing the world as you are instructed to do.
You said in the pre-interview, like most trauma survivors, you repressed your memories. Do you recall when and what triggered your memories?
I actually do. I had been living in New Mexico. My son was I think he was about to turn 5. And we moved back to Maryland, which is where I grew up and where the abuse happened, in Maryland and DC. And what I later read was that this is a pretty common thing, that my son was about the age I was when the abuse started in earnest. And then moving back to where it happened triggered the memories to start coming back. So that was quite a while ago. Actually, he is now in his early 40s.
I know that not all cults are alike. And I know that you said that you were taken by, I think, your grandfather and father to the cult, but you didn't always live with them. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. I was lucky because I had a parent who was not involved in the cult and was not aware of what was happening. And that may sound horrible, but because I had some sense of normalcy with my mom, it actually saved me in a lot of ways.
I mean, this may be an obvious question and maybe there's not an answer, but how could she not know? Do you have any idea how she could not know that?
It's a good question. And I know, it was heartbreaking to her. She felt very guilty for a long time. But part of, cult culture, I guess you could call it, or behavior, is threatening children and threatening with things like that, that their parents will be hurt if you tell. And in the kind of cult that I was abused by, there was some very well orchestrated techniques used to make me dissociate so that I would not be able to talk about it.
Can you share, and I hate to have you relive this experience, but can you share some of those tricks or training that they did to make you dissociate? Or was there alcohol involved, drugs?
Well, I know that there were drugs involved at times. I was very young when it started. I was like 4, maybe. And so I really don't, and it was orchestrated to make me not remember. So I really can't tell you specifics. I just know that for a long time, if I tried to talk about what happened to me, I would start to panic and felt like I was going to die, basically, or that someone was going to harm me. So I know it worked. I cannot tell you unfortunately, the specifics.
Do you remember if it was just 1 or 2 individuals that abused you, or was it all the members? Was it
It was a number of people. There were people on my father's side of the family, my father, my grandfather, uncles, and then there were non-family members.
Now, how long were you at the cult at any one given point or in the community and then would go home to your mother?
Yeah, so my mother and I would go to my grandparents for brunch on Sundays. And then she would leave me with them, while she went, basically she thought they were babysitting. And so it would be an all day thing where then she'd come back in the evening for me. So that was the most common, was that it was pretty much all day on Sundays,
And
or at least part of the day.
the grandparents were living on the community with the cult or
So
outside
nobody lived together. It wasn't a cult like the, Branch Davidians or, something like that. It was a group of people that would get together
I see.
at certain times to perform rituals.
See, and I'm not sure if I'm alone in this, but when I think of cult leaders, I think of David Koresh and
Yeah.
the siege at Waco in, 1993.
Mm-hmm.
When you saw things on the news about cults, was there anything in the back of your mind that you're thinking, maybe some of this happened to me?
This was quite a while ago. I can't remember exactly when. There were some men arrested in Mexico because they performed some satanic rituals and killed some people in the rituals and buried them. And that, was one thing. Actually, it was hard for me to believe the things I was remembering. And that was one of the situations where I thought, oh, maybe it's not so far-fetched. I know there are a lot of religious cults where the point is to suck people in and to keep them involved in a religious organization. People were sucked in. I know I had to make a conscious effort to leave the cult, when I was in my late teens, but it was more of a secret organization than what we see mostly on the news.
And that's when I think of KKK and other so-called secret organizations. How did the experience affect your family dynamics and your relationships in the past and in the future?
So I guess in a way I was lucky that my parents were divorced when I was, I guess, around 3. So my contact with my father was basically at cult or if he would come to get me for a day. But it wasn't an ongoing sort of a thing. It's hard to say. I grew up thinking I had these grandparents who loved me and cherished me because I blocked out the abuse. So it was very confusing when I started to remember that the abuse, because it was shocking to me in some ways, even though it was a relief also that, this is why I've been feeling the way I have for so long. It affected my relationship with my mother a lot because she felt so horrible that she had not known and wanted things like for me to be in therapy with her when she wanted me to, so that she could feel better, basically. And so it strained our relationship quite a bit.
At what point did you let your mother know what was happening? I mean, that had to be a very difficult conversation.
Yes, it was. I let her know after I had been dealing with it for at least 6 months to a year. And I told her over the phone. And I made sure that my stepdad was with her so she would have support.
And did she right away acknowledge it or say, make associations with your behavior or anything like that?
Yes, she did. It explained to her that there were times when, I would sort of run hot and cold. I would be engaged and social, and then I would suddenly need to be by myself. So it did explain that. I but I think it was more a shock to her, and that was from the purposeful brainwashing and threats, and working on ways to get me to dissociate that the cult members did.
Once you started to uncover these memories, did you go to therapy? I know you said your mother wanted you to go to therapy when she wanted you to go to therapy, but did you decide on your own to go?
Oh yeah, yeah, I did, and I'm still in therapy years later, and probably will until I can no longer walk and talk. But yeah, I had gotten into therapy because my marriage was kind of falling apart, and then continued with that therapist. Yeah,
Yeah,
and have over the years seen several therapists.
we talked in the intro, or I mentioned in the intro, that leaving the cult is a very challenging situation. Do you remember what incident happened that triggered your decision to leave the cult?
I tried several times as a teenager, and it took the form of me getting angry at my father in outside of cult life, and then cutting off contact with him. So not really understanding, why I was so angry, but using that, I guess, in an adolescent kind of way to be able to walk away. And then when we moved back to Maryland, and nothing had happened for quite a while. I had been in New Mexico, but I moved back, and my father started making overtures to my son, sending presents. And even though I said I wasn't comfortable with contact, even though I didn't know why, asking for visits with my son. And I think it was that really triggered me to start to remember things in order to protect my son.
Were there other kids that were in this cult with you, and were you able to talk to them or share any
I've had
experiences?
one conversation with my stepsister, who's a couple of years younger than I am, and that was quite a while ago. And I told her some of the things that I remembered, and she told me she knew that there were things that had happened. She told me some odd experiences she had had with my father. She grew up with him, and that she was choosing not to remember.
I mean, that's how trauma works, and that's how our mind protects us from those horrible situations.
Yeah, that's how she chose to cope with it. Yeah.
Do you remember facing any particular challenges I know you said you tried to leave a couple of times, but on that final time when you did actually separate yourself, do you remember what challenges you were facing during that time?
I was falling apart. You mean when I was an adult and my son was around the same age?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. The challenge was that I was getting flooded with memories, and I wasn't able to really function in an adult capacity. And so I had my ex-husband and I fortunately had a great working relationship as parents. I had primary physical custody, and we had joint custody in terms of decision making. And so I asked if he would be willing to reverse those roles for a while. Because I wasn't able to be a good parent at that point. And I could see that. I didn't want it affecting my son any more than it had to.
But I imagine you
So,
having to leave your son with your ex-husband had an emotional impact on everyone involved, particularly your son.
oh yeah. Yeah, it was very hard on everyone. So I'm glad my ex-husband was supportive, and he was very supportive. And I don't know how common that is, but I think because we had done the work and been able to work through our animosity, our son benefited from that.
How long did it roughly take you to sort of adjust to being on your own and outside of the cult?
Well, I didn't remember anything at that point. I was in my early 20s, early to mid 20s, I guess. And so I wish I could remember and tell you, but I don't know. I mean, it was more of an adjustment when I started remembering what had happened. I just thought I was living my life in my 20s.
What would you say that your perspective is on faith and trust after such a horrific experience?
Yeah, well, that's a hard one for me. That's a very difficult one. I have to consciously look at a situation or how things are going with another person and I guess be able to observe and then tell myself, okay, this is a safe situation. It's not something necessarily where I have good, nervous system regulation where I can notice it without effort.
As someone who's been going to therapy, is there some advice from your therapist or some tools that they have given you to navigate that trust and faith?
So for people, the survivors of this kind of abuse, I would say try your best to find someone with specialized training. And if not in cult abuse, then in some kind of somatic therapy where they can help you to reconnect your physical sensations with your mind. And for therapists, I would say the most important thing is to believe the person, that it may sound far-fetched and crazy, and memories are not necessarily completely correct. And I'm the first to say that, but believe that the basic experiences that they are telling you did happen.
Talking about the physical aspects of it and the emotions that go through your body, as you were just saying, and I'm wondering if when you went back and forth between your mother's house and your father and grandparents' care, do you recall feeling any kind of odd sensation or gut reaction that maybe you shouldn't be doing this, going there?
Oh, interesting question. I don't, I think I had a lot of anxiety about going to my father's house. And I'm thinking mostly when I was a teenager and he had remarried for the third time to a woman who had several children and then they had several together. And he had cut off contact with me for quite a while that I was aware of, that in the cult stuff was happening, but in, I guess you could call it real life, that kind of contact had been cut off. And so he wanted me to come and have dinner with him and his third wife and all of the kids. He was just, bunching us all together. And it felt very, very uncomfortable to me. And at the time I thought it was because I didn't know, they were supposed to be my step siblings and I really didn't know them. But thinking back on it, it probably was at least partly about being afraid of what was going to happen.
I imagine you've talked with your father about this, or have you not talked to him? And if you have, sorry for the long question.
Yeah.
Did he ever apologize or take ownership of what happened?
Well, he died a long time ago. He died in 96. And at one point when I was a teenager, and I think right before an actual episode of pretty awful abuse. He asked me if I had anything I wanted to talk about him leaving my mother, and that he would always be open to me talking about anything. And at the time, I was shut down and scared, and I said no. And then years later, I approached him and said, I'd like to talk with you. And we met at a diner near where I lived. And I had not started to remember anything then. It was close to then. And I started talking about how I felt, about what I remembered of him. And he told me I was being petulant and that he wasn't going to listen to it. And he got up and left. And that was the last time I saw him in person. And the last time I spoke with him, because shortly after that, I started getting memories back. I do know, and he never did apologize. He never acknowledged anything. He did find out through a relative that I was starting to remember things, and he blamed it on, he said I had a bad therapist who was planting memories. What was that, recovered memories syndrome? Or there was some term for it at the time. It's probably still used. I do know that he then, towards the end of his life, he became a devout, I think, Russian Orthodox Christian. We're Jewish, and grew a very long beard. And the therapist I was seeing at the time said she thought it was probably because he was afraid he was going to hell, which seems plausible to me. So no, he never acknowledged it. In fact, I'm the only person on my father's side of the family. None of the step siblings have acknowledged it. I was asked not to attend his funeral because they were afraid I would make a scene.
Oh, wow.
And I was afraid to go. It was very painful to be told that, but I also was afraid of who might be there and what might happen to me. So I didn't go.
I don't know if I were in the same place, whether I'd want to go or not to that funeral. I mean,
because of the cult, I really wasn't sure if I was safe to go.
Exactly. I would feel the same way personally.
Yeah.
I imagine, this is going to stay with you, as you say, for the rest of your life. But over time and with therapy, do you feel like you would define your identity differently than you would have, say, 20 years ago?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I stopped. I have a master's in social work, and I started recovering memories when I was in graduate school, and made a promise to myself that if it started to affect my ability to be there for my clients, that I would stop. And I did that, and was on disability for quite a few years. And now, it's taken a long, long time, but I feel like I have a life now, that I've created a life for myself. I know myself pretty well now. There was a point where I made the decision that I wanted to live in the present. And that was when I really started healing. When I decided, no, I don't have to be back there. I don't have to keep remembering, and I can have a life for myself. And so now in the present, I'm not working directly in social work, but I'm a professional force-free dog trainer. And I know that my experiences, my trauma history affects how I work with people and dogs. And I think in a very positive way.
Absolutely. I think it's been very brave of you to open up like this to us on this podcast, and I really appreciate that. It seems to me that the lessons that you may have learned is maybe a little bit of acceptance and to live in the present and not in the past. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yes and no. I think it's important not to deny the past, especially if you are a trauma survivor. You can't just say, well, I'm not going to think about that and everything will be fine, because it'll come up in one way or another. But I think that for anyone working on some kind of abuse history where they keep feeling like they're getting sucked back and they're not able to stay in the present, I think it's important to get help from a therapist that can help you to do both, to be both working in a productive way on what happened in the past and to be able to notice that you're in the present. And I think for me, that is what led to me finally being able to notice, oh, maybe I'm safe in the present and maybe this isn't such a bad place to be.
Well, thank you for taking us along this journey with you. I appreciate it. We are nearly out of time. So I want to thank my guest, Joanne Ometz, for sharing her story with us. And I want to thank those who have tuned in for following Voices for Mental Health. And to remember to always put yourself first, and you are not alone.